Hello and welcome to Page and Screen with John Paul Sarney. Joining me today is Jeffrey Seller. Jeffrey is one of the most celebrated producers on Broadway and the only one with two Pulitzer Prize winning musicals to his name, Rent and Hamilton. His work as a producer champions new voices in the theater and advances global conversation about the arts and what it can achieve. His new book is Theater Kid, a Broadway memoir, which chronicles his childhood in Detroit and journey to Broadway, where his taste and hustle put him in the rooms where it happened. Jeffrey Seller, welcome to the program.
Hello, John Paul. Thank you so much for hosting me today.
Absolutely. It's nice to see you. So, with this book, we should probably begin at the beginning because you've broken your story up into three acts. The first being your childhood, which is literally I think the first two words of the book, which are Cardboard Village, this neighborhood in Detroit, which probably could not have seemed farther away from the bright lights of Broadway. Tell me how you found your way into the theater from a young age, because you were so ambitious so early on, even so far from New York City.
Thank you. I think you just nailed maybe one of the reasons I wrote the book, which was the idea that a kid from Cardboard Village in Oak Park, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit, could get from there a kid who was a Jewish, poor, adopted, burgeoning gay kid would get from there to Broadway was the most unlikely story imaginable. And I myself didn't quite know how, I knew how to imagine it, but I didn't know how to achieve it. And I think I wrote this book to unpack how I achieved it. And of course, like all of us theater kids, it starts with being in a play.
Yeah.
It starts with seeing a play. For me, seeing a local play that the teenagers do in Oak Park, Michigan, that's a rock musical of Rumpelstiltskin called Rump, where I can still remember the opening song. Everybody do the rump, rump, rump. And it begins with me seeing our Temple Purim play, which, for those who aren't Jewish, let me explain. Purim is the holiday that celebrates Queen Esther, one of the heroes of the Old Testament. Queen Esther saves the Jews at the hands of the murderous and sadistic Haman. And we do this play at Temple every spring in the same way that Christians do the nativity pageant every Christmas. And I loved watching the Purim play. I remember saying to myself, how do they learn all those lines? Like, how do they know the line and when to say it? And I was just fascinated by that. And somehow in fourth grade, when they announced auditions for the Purim play, I said to my dad, will you take me to the temple for auditions? And he said, get in the car. And I went to the auditions, and I always liked reading out loud in class. So I was a clear reader, but I didn't yet know that you read with emotion. So I was in the chorus, and that year they juxtaposed the story of Queen Esther and Purim against South Pacific, um, and a little bit of HMS Pinafore. So Queen Esther, singing about King Ahasuerus, was singing, I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair.
It's quite the mashup.
Oh my God. And then the sailors, of which I was one, were singing, we sail the ocean blue in our saucy ships of beauty, from HMS Pinafore. So I realized in retrospect that my first experience being in the theater was this incredibly ingenious mashup of Rodgers and Hammerstein, Gilbert and Sullivan, and of course the Old Testament, which we know to be very fertile ground for new musicals.
It's amazing storytelling, and but also part of it though, when you're still, I believe, if I remember correctly, when you're still in Michigan, you start to change your perspective about the theater and how it works and what your role in it wants to be from a young age, because you were kind of pitching shows that you thought had some commercial viability and trying to convince people to do Cheaper by the Dozen and The Hobbit because that'll get, butts in the seats, and these are the shows we should be doing.
Oh my
How
gosh.
old were you?
Yes. I mean, for me, it was a quick journey from being in a play to
Yeah.
writing a play, and then with my friends, directing and producing that play that I wrote called Adventureland, and then doing community theater and youth theater. And I remember so distinctly, I'm in the eighth grade and I'm in a play at my youth theater called The Adventures of Popcorn Pete. And I've noticed three things. One, I think it's a dumb title, like it's silly. Who wants to go see The Adventures of Popcorn Pete? Two, it's not very good. Like nothing really transpires in the 50 minutes that this play takes place. And three, our audiences are meager. So I say, who picks the play? And when Mrs. Janney says that's the play reading committee, I say, I want to be on the play reading committee. And of course, there was a slot for me because how many 14-year-olds want to spend their free time reading plays?
Right.
But I did.
Yeah.
And it was a very short journey to me picking the play. And I like to say, once I picked the play, I made my first leap toward becoming producer.
Nice. No, it's and we do need those, we people need people like us who want to read all the things and really get nerdy about it and drill down. But when you started to really make the leap, when you decided to pick up and you moved to New York City and you're in a Broadway office for the first time. Again, it's to the side of producing. It's not quite producing, but I think people watch a lot of these movies and TV shows, things like The Devil Wears Prada and all these stories about like the young person, Thoroughly Modern Millie, the young thing arrives in New York City and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then is in an office with some super aggressive person who's telling them how the world works, and it's very intense. And your experience was in the office of, or I think one of them was in the office of Jeffrey Richards. And I was in some of those offices when I was in New York as well. And I mean, tell me a little bit about that experience, because you were doing something that wasn't really producing. It was working tangentially, but you found your way into producing because of it.
Yeah, no, the office I worked in was the office of Fran and Barry Weissler. What had happened is I once went for an interview at Jeffrey Richards,
Ah, okay.
and he offered me a gig in which, at the time, they would commonly pay the new kid on the block under the table cash, and I couldn't afford to do a job that didn't have health insurance
Right.
because I was so worried about AIDS. Because I'm a young gay guy in New York City and I didn't have health insurance and I couldn't take a job without health insurance. So that's what happened there. But I did get a job at the Weislers when I was 22 years old. They were one of the busiest offices on Broadway because they produced their own shows, they general managed their own shows, and they booked the national tours of their own shows. And I wound up in their booking office, which meant that when they were doing Cabaret starring Joel Grey, they were the producers. I was their booker under a boss named Susan Weaving, who's still an agent at WME. And um, and what we were doing is selling, negotiating, organizing, and planning how you take Joel Grey from Detroit to Cleveland to Columbus to Louisville to Atlanta, Tampa, Miami, and the whole country.
And as you do that, as you're figuring out the way to become a producer, you put in this book something that I always have trouble, because as a producer in film and television, I have a lot of trouble and spend a lot of my time explaining to people outside of our industry what a producer does. And I think you put it, really nicely. You said, I made something exist that didn't previously exist. And so you're finding all these things around you, and you kind of have to, other people can go, interview for a job that is listed in the classifieds, And as producers, we have to kind of make jobs, and that's what you started to do. You started to think of ways to put things together and to mix things up, and then eventually, getting some great partners who literally would whip out a checkbook at meetings, if I recall.
Well, first of all, thank you. That isn't that what we do as producers? We make something exist that did not previously exist. And I really appreciate you highlighting that phrase or that sentence. Because, like, when you said that, the first thing that came to my mind was I'm working at the Weislers by day as a booker. And my best friend at the time is Andrew Lippa, and he's a student at the BMI Musical Theater Workshop, and he's writing with a guy named Tommy Greenwald. And then I say to the two of them, hey, why don't we go do a musical at Road of Shalom, where I'd been directing community theater up on West 83rd Street. And then literally I commissioned them to take a play that I directed in Ann Arbor called Shtetl Tales. And then we convert this children's play into a musical called A Pound of Feathers. We get Road of Shalom to give us the space for free. We get Road of Shalom to give us $10,000. I find 10 more $1,000 from another young person, and we put up the show. And this is when I'm, 25 years old.
Well, I also loved it in the book, and maybe you keep really good diaries, but you remember all the deal terms of all these deals that you put together. You remember all the particulars. It's amazing.
Well, this, this was my, my PhD. Of course, I don't have a PhD nor a master's, but my PhD was on Broadway working at the Weislers. And we knew the capacity of every single theater in the country. Like, name me a city, I'll name you a theater. I'll probably tell you the capacity. Um, I, and, one of my jobs was to collect the daily sales. And I could basically recite the daily sales of any show we were doing.
It's astounding. Well, you've done when you finally were able to move beyond that and into capital P producing, you've done several enormous shows. One of the first was of course Rent,
Yeah.
and your conversations. You chronicle in the book your kind of the courtship of trying to start working with young Jonathan Larson, and deciding how to do that. But then the moment that you actually kind of got him on the phone was a pivotal moment in your career because it was kind of like one door closing, another door opening. So tell us about this moment and taking a shot on a young unknown writer like Mr. Larson.
Well, in the fall of 90, there were three things going on at my life at the same time. Number one is I was growing increasingly frustrated in my job as a booker at the Weisler office. It wasn't rewarding to me anymore. And my urge to produce was so strong, but there was no way to make a living. Number two is I had just broken up from my a 6-year relationship, and I was lonely, and I didn't know, like, I was lonely. And number three is a friend invited me. She said, I'm going to see my friend's rock monologue tonight. She showed me the flyer, and it said, uh, Boho Days, a rock monologue by Jonathan Larson. And we went to the very first performance of that. And there on stage is a piano, bass, drums, electric guitar. Out comes a lanky, tall, curly-haired guy who is ferocious at the piano, and his name is Jonathan Larson, and he's singing all about his 30th birthday and how he is a 30-year-old composer of rock musicals that nobody wants to produce. He is asking himself, should he keep writing musicals no one wants to produce and work like a dog at the Moondance Diner as a waiter? Or should he take a job his friend's offering him to be a copywriter at an ad agency? Should he stay with his girlfriend who he knows is not the right person for him? Or should he be courageous and break up and know that maybe he'll find the right person if he breaks up? And as he's singing about these issues in the most incredible songs, the hair on my arms is standing up. It's standing up right now as I think about it. And I'm thinking, how does this man know he's telling my life story? And I'm cheering and I'm crying. And it was so powerful. I wrote him a letter the next day saying, "Dear Jonathan, my name is Jeffrey Seller. I'm a booker. I'm a producer. I want to produce your musicals." And about 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in the conference room at the Weissler office and I'm eating lunch. And my boss comes in while I'm eating my carrots. And she said, "We have to talk." And she had a business envelope in her left hand. And she sits down at the table. And as she is telling me I'm fired and to gather my belongings and I can leave now, the all office intercom goes off and the receptionist says, "Jeffrey Seller, Jonathan Larson on line 3." And I'm literally getting fired. And I hear Jonathan Larson is calling me back after that letter. And so I have to say, take a message. And I collect my belongings. I go home. I call Jonathan and I tell him, well, he says, "How are you?" I said, "I don't know. I was just fired." And he said, well, is that good or bad?" I went, "Well, if I believe anything about your show, it has to be good." And of course, that show, Boho Days, is the show we now know of as Tick, Tick, Boom, portrayed by Andrew Garfield in the movie Tick, Tick, Boom, directed by the great Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Right. And it's at that moment, and you're starting to kind of put all of the eggs into the one basket. And I think you describe it really well because part of, being a producer is on the one hand, you're running about town, you're looking for a venue, you're trying to find money, you're trying to see if this thing is marketable, if people will come see it. And then on the other hand, you have to be very, very creative. And some of your early conversations with him were not maybe the kindest. You were kind of having to give him notes about, there are some real problems with the script and some things you need to reshape as you get into Rent and always at a restaurant. And so how do
Sure. It's
you
so funny. I love that you just said always in a restaurant because, of course, yeah, I mean, we all lived in shit apartments. So we all were, you'd meet in restaurants.
no
Although,
one had
no,
a conference room?
no, but John, yeah, right. Jonathan and I did meet the second time, or one of the times we met, we did meet in his kitchen where the bathtub really was right there in the kitchen. But, and we had tea. But yes, we were always meeting in a restaurant. And what you're bringing up is something that is so tricky about being a producer, which is that when we take on, I'm going to use as an example musicals, because that's really what I do. I become a parent. I'm like a nurturer, a cheerleader. Uh, I'm a protector. Um, and I have to be very careful. When do I recommend something? When do I suggest something? When do I criticize? When do I say, can you do better? And there was a pivotal conversation, more than one, but the first one about Rent was that Jonathan had been working on Rent for a couple years. I thought it was a sensational idea. When he said to me, "I want to do La Boheme in the East Village where Mimi has AIDS instead of tuberculosis," I was like, I'm in. I loved it. And I knew La Boheme. Uh, I like opera, more of the greatest hits, the Carmens, the La Bohemes, the Aidas. And I just thought, what an ingenious idea. And it's Bohemians. And uh, he invites me to the first preview, I'm sorry, he invites me to the first ever reading. It's in the spring of 93. And I bring two people with me. One is a fledgling young producer who's from Australia uh, and has access to big money because his mother owns a theater chain in London. And the other one is a burgeoning director. And the show starts and there's a great opening number, which is Rent. And then it kind of just completely gets lost. And I can't follow the plot. I can't follow the characters. There's no air conditioning. By an hour and a half in, act one is over. It's 90 degrees. And the Australian guy just apologizes and says he can't stay anymore. He doesn't have time. He leaves. He leaves at intermission. And of course, that was the Australian way of saying, I hate this. I got to get out of here as fast
Right.
as possible.
Polite.
And after the show ends, another hour and a half later, the other friend I bring says, "Well, I like Jonathan and I think he's talented, but he shouldn't even bother with, he just needs to start something else." So I was disappointed.
Yeah, well, and if
Yeah.
people, I think a lot of people know the story of Rent. If they don't, because it'd be a disservice to even try to get into too much of it here, but because so much of the book goes into the whole process and the ups and downs and the tragic early passing of Jonathan before the show even opened, but
Yes.
all the things that it did. So you chronicle it really beautifully here with great detail. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because for a lot of the young people who listen to this podcast know about going to Broadway shows now and being able to go to a lot of shows and pay $20 or whatever it is today
Yeah.
for, front row tickets to great things on Broadway.
$10 for Hamilton, 10.
$10, all these great access to great things. But I didn't realize until I read your book that it was in the past, those seats were way in the back of the mezzanine. Those were not great seats. And so when shows like Rent came along, you guys you wanted to flip the script and you said, "Oh, these are the people that need to be in the front row." And it creates like a wave of energy and excitement that goes back into the theater.
Thank you. Yes. When Kevin McCullum, my business partner at the time, and I produced Rent, I was 31, he was 32. We could barely afford to to pay a full price ticket for a Broadway musical back then. This is like 1996. So we knew we had to do something. And I want to say something else. There were occasional discounts to shows, but it was not a regular policy. And for the most part, if you couldn't, you could either buy a full price ticket or you could go to the TKTS booth, and that were your only options. Once in a while, a show would have a student rush, but we had a couple of values. One is, why should it just be students? Because you get out of school at NYU or Columbia and you're 23, 24, 25, you can afford it. You're a retired librarian at 67, you may not be able to afford it. So, A, it can't just be students, it's got to be everybody. B, why should we put them in the rear? Let's flip the script. We'll put them in the first two rows. They'll start the wave that will go all the way to the back. And we did this for Rent with a $20 cash only at the door 2 hours before the show. And the very first performance of Rent, in its first preview on April 15th, there was a smattering of people online, and we sold all 34 tickets, but it wasn't like it wasn't a boom. And within a year, on a Friday, there would be 3 lines on 41st Street. One line for Friday night at 8, one line for Saturday afternoon at 2, and one line for Saturday at 8. And it was when kids were sleeping over on 41st Street in 1997 that Kevin and I said, someone's going to get hurt. So we got to change this. And we converted the line to a lottery at 6 p.m. And it is one of my um, most rewarding achievements for me to know that that has increased accessibility for almost everyone for so many shows over so many years, including the Metropolitan Opera, where you can get that ticket and stand at the in the back of the orchestra, or no, sit in the back of the orchestra.
Yes, and I did that. I saw the Barber of Seville at the Mets for on the cheap seats, and it was absolutely worth it. But
Like, I love it.
the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I was in New York a couple weeks ago, and I probably shouldn't admit this into a microphone, but I paid $500 a seat to see Othello,
I'm so, I'm
and
so sorry
then
I had to do that.
And then, earlier last week, I saw a famous actor kind of blaring off about it, rightfully so, because I guess that wasn't the most expensive seat by any means. There are $1,000 tickets to shows like Othello. So what do you think of the pricing of Broadway now? Because it's so different than I talked about this once with director Rob Ashford on the show because I go to see a lot of shows in London. Where in London you can get one of the best seats in the house for like 150 pounds sterling, but on Broadway the prices feel like they really can run away from you. So, how do you feel about the state of the pricing on other shows on Broadway now? Because it's quite intense.
I want to say on a positive level, there are many discounts being offered in the marketplace. And I just saw the New York Times did an article saying, how can you get a discount ticket? And they showed the consumer how to do it. We all know that if you go to something like Today Tix, they have discounts every single day through their app. We know we have the TKTS booth and TDF, and then we know we have the $20 tickets, or maybe they're 30 for some shows in the first rows. So we have many ways to get a discount ticket, and it only takes a little bit of industriousness on the part of the consumer to find it. I also want to say, if Denzel Washington and Jake Gyllenhaal are in a play on Broadway and the producer sells the ticket for only, let's say, $229, what's going to happen? The scalpers are going to buy all those tickets, and then they are going to resell them for whatever the market will bear. And if the market will bear $500, it'll be 500. And if the market says $1,000, it's going to be $1,000. Same thing for George Clooney. Same thing for Hamilton after we opened. Now,
Yeah.
so what I'm saying is, better that the producer of Othello should charge the $500 so that those dollars go to the royalty participants, the actors, the producer, and the investors, because they're the ones who deserve it. So the reason that ticket is $500 is because that is what the market is saying it should. And when you have shows like that, we have to be if we don't listen to the market, then we're just going to hurt ourselves. The only thing I can hope is that those monies, those $500 tickets, do get on some level regenerated into a virtuous loop, that at least it's helping actors, producers, investors, so that they can invest in more shows.
Yes. And speaking of more shows, because we don't have a lot of time, but we have to talk about Hamilton, obviously. I wanted to say I was very surprised when I read the book that the original title of Hamilton was not exactly Hamilton. And not only that, but you had, I think, the late great Gavin Creel had actually done one of the earlier recordings of it. So what was the original name of Hamilton? Because it
Yeah.
wasn't meant to be a show.
Well, Lynn started by wanting to write a concept album, and it was called the Hamilton Mixtape.
Hmm.
Uh, and he wanted to make a hip hop album of all the songs and put that out there. And it is yet another sweet facet of our story, that at the very first ever presentation, where Lynn, with his great collaborator, Tommy Kail, created a cabaret evening of songs from Hamilton at Jazz at Lincoln Center, in front of that beautiful glass curtain. And Gavin wore a Burger King crown and sang "You'll Be Back," and how sweet was that? So yeah, that was his original title. The goal that I think Thomas Kail had with that presentation was to prove to Lynn that it's a musical. And in my way of writing letters, which I like to do, it was after that presentation that I sent Tommy and Lynn an email saying, "I am at your service. I will be here if you would like me to produce your musical as soon as you're ready to go." And that was, I think, in the winter of 2012.
It's been such a journey, not just for Hamilton on stage, but then also later on the film, and Hamilton continues with the tour, and you have original cast members now coming back. I think for a little bit this season, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
well, this is our incredible 10th anniversary summer, because we started previews on Broadway in July, opened in August. So this is our 10th anniversary summer. And then our colleague and friend Leslie Odom Jr. is going to come back and do another stint as Aaron Burr, beginning in September and through the holidays.
Fabulous. It's amazing. With these legacy productions though, that people start to see them on the streets of Broadway and in the West End, and it feels like it's a staple. It's like Les Miserables and Phantom and Hamilton and Rent. Like it just belongs there on the sidewalk and nothing else should ever take that space. For you as a producer, what is because live theater is always hard about getting people in, but 10 years on, how does the job change for you?
You know what? The job for me is always if I could quote David Geffen for just a moment, who made the album of Rent all those years ago and would give me some advice. He's like, "It's all about your next show, Jeffrey." So my job in so many ways is to delegate all the daily tasks of Hamilton and be thinking always far in advance. So I'm thinking of what are we going to be doing in 6 months and a year and 2 years? What will Hamilton be doing? And what will I be doing? So, you know what my job is? Find the next show. Remember how I said who picks the play? My job is to go pick another play. And I'm still doing the same thing I did when I was 14.
So what's the next show, Jeffrey?
Oh, I knew you were gonna ask that, and I'm not going to tell you. I have the next show. I think I have the next 3 shows, but I'm not ready to talk about them.
Well, let me ask you this. We the book is now out today because it is Tuesday, the 6th of May. But the Tony Awards came out a few days ago. Seeing the Tony Awards, seeing some of these shows that, some of them are a generation on, great shows. I just saw Floyd Collins, which I loved at Lincoln Center. How do you see the future of Broadway in the theater? How do you see things changing or staying the same for better or worse?
I think there are many, forces of positivity. Um, we had something like 12 or 13 new musicals open on Broadway this season, with only 4 or 5 slots for the Tony Awards.
Mm,
So, no, I think it may be a record. Um, we had almost an equal number of new plays this season. It's astonishing. Our attendance this year is approaching, I think we've passed 13 million. I think we might get to 14 million. And we're having the best attendance we've had since the year prior to COVID, which was 1819. So I am buoyed by the extraordinary number of new works that are getting made. Um, I'm concerned about cost. We're always concerned about cost. We all suffered from incredible inflation as a result of COVID and the cost of raw materials, the cost of sets, the cost of costumes, et cetera. And I am, and I'm concerned that we haven't had a mega hit since Hamilton. And by a
mm.
mega hit, I mean a show like Hamilton, Mormon, um, the Phantom, Wicked, Jersey Boys. The mega hits lift all boats.
Yeah.
And if you ask me, what does Broadway need right now? It needs a mega hit, and I hope I produce it. But it needs to happen no matter who does it.
Well, if anyone's going to do it, I think it might be you. Now, but now tell me before I let you go, there are two ways if people want to enjoy your book. The first is a very clever thing that you did, which I listened to, which was an audiobook with a full cast of characters. Some people who actually read as themselves. So tell me about this audiobook version that you put together with the likes of Lin Manuel Miranda and others.
Yeah. Well, thank you. A producer can't stop producing, so I had to, in so many ways, I not only wrote the book, but then produced it, and then of course produced the audio. Um, the idea, when a memoirist, when someone writes a memoir, the publisher wants that person to read it because if they don't read it, it sort of sounds like it doesn't sound true.
Mm,
So but the idea that I was going to read this whole book was anathema to me. So I thought, hey, what if I could get actors to play all the parts? So it's like a staged reading. And I was so fortunate that 15 friends and colleagues, extraordinary actors, Danny Burstein, Lindsay Mendez, Annalie Ashford, Andrew Reynolds, Darren Chris, Renee Goldsberry, and Lin Manuel Miranda. They, so many and more. Chris Sieber, I could keep talking, Sass Goldberg. And uh, they all came in and read every single character in the book,
wow.
and hopefully it makes it sparkle and pop.
Yeah, well, like I said, it does feel electric, and especially some of Annalie Ashford, some of those very intense moments in the early days in the theater. Like I said, gave me a little bit of anxiety because I was flashing back to my own days.
Oh, I
Um,
love it! I love it! I know. Annalie was playing my first boss, Susan Weaving. Unbelievable, unbelievable. And of
And
course,
then
Lynn played Barry Weissler and Renee Goldsberry played Fran Weissler. Fantastic. And then much later in the book, the one person who plays himself is Lynn, since Lynn has some dialogue. Yeah.
right. And then lastly, if people want to get a physical copy of Theater Kid in New York City, is there a little independent bookshop that you like to send people to
That is
support the
certainly
indie?
yes. Well, uh, the drama bookshop continues to be the singular best place to buy books about the performing arts, about theater, about drama, about music in the world. It's on West 39th Street. And it's a labor of love because when they were almost forced to shut down because of rising rents, Lin-Manuel Miranda, Thomas Kail, Jimmy Niederlander, and I bought the drama bookshop and reopened it back in 2021. So buy it at the drama bookshop, buy it at Barnes and Noble, or buy it on Amazon.com, or download and listen to the audiobook. It's going to be kind of, I hope it's, you know what? I knew one thing. No matter what you do, seller, you better entertain and it better be fun.
Well, you certainly did. It is really wonderfully done. The book is called Theater Kid. Jeffrey Seller, thank you so much for coming by Page and Screen, and we'll see you in New York.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.